Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge, a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services focusing on the Port of Anchorage and the major commercial participants in the Cook Inlet region, providing customers with marine services specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
And good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It has been a beautiful day in Anchorage, hopefully where you have been as well. Today's weather and all of your weather needs for the next 6 to 7 days are always on weather.gov/Alaska. You can call the weather info line at 800-472-0391. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube during the day. And YouTube, of course, in the afternoon, you'll get your daily afternoon map briefings. You can find a sneak peek of what we're going to talk about here in Alaska Weather at about 3:45 to 4 o'clock or so. And that fits really well on your phone if you're out in the bush and you do have cell coverage. You can go to Alaska Weather on the search bar and see that very easily, and it will be in a cell format or a smaller package than trying to download this entire show, which you can do, of course, from our broadcast partner here at Alaska Public. If you go to alaskapublic.org, you can watch the whole show there on the right side of their webpage, a little bit down on the right. Or just go to YouTube again later and type in AKwx TV, and you'll get the entire day's worth of weather there, that 30-minute version. Here's a look at the breakup map, and around 3 o'clock this afternoon, our friends at the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center updated this. You'll notice that all of our lower main stem rivers are entirely open. What an easy breakup it seems to have been for most places there. So if you did have trouble, we'd still love to know about it. Up north, we have mostly open conditions there for the Colville and our northern rivers, so conditions continue to be favorable across the region. We will not be talking about breakup a whole lot longer. One issue, though, still a concern, of course, of the Sag River, and we'll continue to watch that. Here's a look at the fire danger now, turning toward the other side of spring and into early summer. We have high fire danger across a large part of the middle and upper Yukon Valley and into the Copper River Basin and the Tanana Valley, where we start to see that very high to extreme fire danger there, with conditions still tinderbox around Eagle and even northern parts of southeast, with not a whole lot of rain in the last several weeks, thanks to high pressure really keeping things fairly quiet around the Gulf. Even some hot spots around the Kenai from the Funny River fire just last week. Now here's a look at the picture there across the Bering Sea now, and you can see several waves of low pressure, but they're all running into a fairly stout ridge of high pressure here that's holding back a lot of that weather from progressing eastward as easily as it sometimes does. Two of those circulations there are kind of moving back in on themselves. One of this originally part of the Typhoon Dolphin that we were watching late last week into the early part of the weekend. You can see it's brought up some stronger southeasterlies there across southwestern Alaska. Some of those a little bit on the stronger side with the gusts today in the 40 and 50 mile an hour range. A lot of the weather will be fairly low stratus, areas of light showers there across the central and western Aleutians, and another wave of low pressure will come northward as we head into later this week. In the meantime, you can see another batch of clouds working itself eastward. We've got a low pressure circulation here south and west of Sitka, sloshing in the clouds. Most areas have seen plenty of sunshine across southeast today. A few more clouds up north, cloudiness across the Copper River Basin, and then a lot of convection and daytime buildup of the cloud cover as we went through the mid-afternoon. You could really see a lot of that blossoming fairly quickly. As you look out across the Yukon, a lot of this is thunderstorm activity up across the Brooks Range, and then out to the west you can see pretty easily many areas there just seeing increased clouds as that low pressure wave continues to work toward the southwestern coast. So Pretty decent day for most, a fairly dry day for many, and then clouds continue to spill in across the south and west. Here's a look at the surface weather map now. That low pressure system's down to 982 millibars. Out ahead of it, frontal boundary working in across the Alaska Peninsula and some steadier rainfall for places around False Pass and Cold Bay out towards Sand Point. Not a whole lot of wet weather to report across south and western Alaska by late afternoon. A frontal boundary sitting across the Yukon Valley, locked in place a little bit. The cooler air not pushing southward very quickly, and the warmer air that many have across south and west and south central not really pushing northward at this time. But it has created some winds over the weekend. If you're around Denali or Healy, you probably noticed some of that. Out across southeast, fairly clear weather there for most of the inner waterways, but out across the outer coast, plenty of clouds there, especially right along the shore up toward Icy Cape and then into Prince William Sound. In fact, there could be some areas of fog along that region as well. As we head into tonight, high pressure is large and in charge across the Gulf of Alaska at 1,030 millibars. Areas of fog should be expected with that. And we'll have high pressure sitting across the Sisseton Valley at 1,026 millibars. Through the early evening hours, a few showers and thunderstorms are possible there, especially in the Yukon, maybe approaching the Alcan. We did see some of those storms fire up in the late afternoon close to the Alcan border. Out across the west, a front moving into south and western Alaska will bring some better chances of rain across the YK, and then some areas of fog across the southern Bering Sea. A few showers from St. Matthew westward, and low pressure pushing that cooler air northward will also inspire some rain and snow showers from the Gulf of Anadyr, especially westward, with high pressure across the Arctic coast, keeping areas of fog intact across mainly points north. As we head into tomorrow, expect a few showers and thunderstorms to pop up in the daytime heating. A lot of that again across the middle Yukon Valley and eastward. For the Yukon itself, showers and thunderstorms will be a little more scattered across the region, with light rainfall expected to develop across some of the inner coast and northward toward Haines and Skagway and across Icy Cape and Yakutat. High pressure still sitting across the Gulf at 1,032 millibars. To the west, we'll start to see some clouds and light rainfall working itself in from the south to the north across the west coast, and then a little bit further west, that pressure gradient tightens up, and that's where we see a better chance for the winds and as well as areas of scattered rainfall, especially across the Aleutians. Now notice, low pressure here across the western Aleutians is down to 988 millibars. That drops even more by Thursday to 978 millibars. Southeast still looking pretty good, though high pressure is locking in a lot more of that stratus and closer to home. But the focus will be out across the central and eastern chain as well as the Alaska Peninsula with that stronger southerly flow working through the Bering. We can expect winds to come up across the central and western chain to about 40 knots or so. Scattered rain and thunderstorms may become a little bit more widespread as we get into Thursday afternoon for more of the interior, as low pressure sits right across the Alcan, fairly close to Northway and Tok, and many areas across the interior will experience a better chance for convection and probably some thunderstorm activity as well. As we get into temperatures now, notice where the heat is and where it is in many areas across southeast. Saw temps in the 50s and 60s today, including Haines and Skagway. 50s and 60s for most of Prince William Sound. Looks like 56 there in Anchorage, lower 60s for areas around the Susitna Valley, 60s and 70s for the Tanana Valley, 72 in fact in Fairbanks, 71 for Eagle, mid to upper 70s for most of the Yukon as well, including Whitehorse and many areas across the Arctic coast, only in the 30s and 40s by comparison. Looks like 41 around Atkasuk, 31 in Barrow, 36 in Kaktovik, 40s and 50s for most of Kotzebue Sound today. You saw places like Tin City up to 62 degrees with a prevailing southerly flow. 50s for most of Norton Sound, 66 around Galena, 64 in McGrath. Bethel hit 59 this afternoon. Ammonok was 54. Most of the coastal Bering villages were looking at temperatures closer to the mid to upper 40s there thanks to the cool water. Even though most of that's open, it's still fairly cool. St. Paul showing 44. 40s and 50s for the Alaska Peninsula and mid 40s for the Aleutians. 43 around Shemya and Attu this afternoon. Here's a look at low temperatures then tonight. You'll notice many areas in southeast are expecting to see readings close to, if not just a hair below 50 degrees tonight. 30s and 40s for South Central, 49 in Fairbanks, 20s and 30s for the Arctic coast, with the West Coast also looking at temperatures closer to 40 in Nome, upper 30s around Nunivak Island, lower 40s for Bristol Bay, and 39 in St. Paul, with Adak and Atka also around 40 degrees. Dutch Harbor and Unalaska around 41 with a high of 46 tomorrow. Once again, the interior is going to be the hot spot, upper 60s to mid 70s tomorrow. 75 in Eagle. South Central should see a pleasant day with mid 50s and lower 60s for many, including Prince William Sound. 55 in Kodiak, upper 50s to mid 60s for Southeast, thanks to drier weather for you. And again, 30s and 40s for the Bering Sea coast, including Norton Sound and Unalakleet, about 55 degrees for you. Here's a look at aviation weather now. Out across the west, expect IFR conditions from Tin City all the way down into the outer edges of Norton Sound and parts of the coastal, very far south and western parts of YK, and then into Nunivak Island and westward. You'll also see IFR conditions generally just east of a front that's working itself across the Alaska Peninsula. This will gradually improve, I think, by late in the day, but for most areas, at least in the morning, expect IFR conditions there and north of Dillingham. MVFR conditions through the northern parts of the Copper River Basin, that should also improve, and MVFR mainly across the outer coast of southeast, with most of the inner waterways looking at VFR conditions there. Anaktuvuk Pass expected to see afternoon thunderstorms there. VFR otherwise, same goes for Adigan Pass, and of course a good time to remind pilots, as always, that thunderstorms do automatically imply isolated areas of icing, turbulence, and low-level wind shear. So be extremely careful there when you start to see those towering cumulus develop. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass expected to be VFR through most of the day. You'll see some afternoon buildup there around Rainy Pass as well. And Windy Pass expected to see VFR throughout your Wednesday. Isabel Pass will probably start out around MVFR, trending toward VFR conditions by the afternoon. Mentasta Pass, watch for some buildup in the afternoon. We'll start the morning at marginal and then head toward VFR. Tonita Pass should be VFR throughout your day. Portage Pass looks pretty good. And Chilkoot and White Pass will likely start at MVFR, heading for VFR conditions by the afternoon. Now, freezing levels, what a mess this is, huh? But it's a sign that we're moving towards summer with a lot of that warm air building into the Gulf. You've got a 10,000-foot freezing level here right across the Dixon entrance. A cooler air aloft, mainly around the northern and eastern parts of the Gulf, down to 4,000 feet at the lower levels. And then you've got cooler air still sitting across the central and western Bering. But look at all the warmth that's developed across the central and western interior. Levels there from just about McGrath to the western tip of the Seward Peninsula to about Fairbanks or so, 6,000 to 8,000 feet, and again, above 8,000 feet here across the Alcan border and north toward Kaktovik. So a lot of heat sitting there aloft, and that, of course, affects the rest of your aviation weather, like icing. Above 10,000 feet for the Copper River Basin, any icing we see at this point should be light to isolated moderate. Probably light icing potential along that frontal boundary that's marching eastward and falling apart. So we still have some moisture and cool air here. That'll be above 9,000 feet. And then way out west across the western Bering above 5,000 feet. So a lot of this moisture is kind of dissipating and being stretched out. So what we saw yesterday, today is improved. Tomorrow will improve even more across the west coast. The jet stream shows high pressure pushing that southerly flow even further and further north. So we've got a pretty much due south flow coming across the west coast. So winds moving from south to north. A much stronger jet coming in from the west that's supporting that next wave of low pressure that we'll see on the map again across the western Aleutians. Another wave of low pressure across the south and western Gulf. Wind speeds fairly light across that. Right now it's that ridge across the north coast that's keeping things pretty much status quo. At 9,000 feet, we can see the weak circulation across northern parts of southeast. Winds around 15 to 30 knots there. Winds are very light across the interior thanks to high pressure slowing things down. It's that predominant southerly flow working up the west coast, 20 to 25 knots or so. And then a much stronger flow from the west and southwest across the central and western chain, 50 to 60 knots there at 9,000 feet. At 3,000 feet, see a similar pattern here. Our ridge is still locked in place across the Gulf. North and westerly winds are coming through southeastern Alaska. They're very light winds across the middle and upper Yukon Valley. High pressure across the north coast is still slowing the winds down across the Brooks Range, mainly east and northeast, anywhere from 15 to 5 knots. So very slow stuff on the south side of that. And they pick up across the Bering Strait, a southeasterly flow up to 20 to 35 knots, and then stronger winds again across the central and western chain as high as 50 to even 60 knots a little bit further west. So turbulence, yeah, we're going to watch for a little bit of chop here on the outer coast below 4,000 feet. Most of that should be pretty isolated. Same goes for the northern Gulf, the Alaska Peninsula, and the southwestern Cape. So a lot of what we were seeing today, gusts on the order of 40 and 50 miles per hour there, especially around Cape Newenham. So watch for some wind shear, watch for some stronger gusts, especially below 4,000 feet. Now areas west of the Bering Strait all the way down to the central chain below 4,000 feet, you'll still run into some light to isolated chop. A little bit further south, though, we'll start to see a developing area of occasional moderate as that stronger area of low pressure develops even more on Wednesday and then strengthens as we head into Thursday. So watch for some changes there in the North Pacific heading north. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with the rest of your marine weather and an update on the sea ice edge here in the Bering Strait in just a few minutes.
It's civilization versus nature's fury. Raging blizzards bury cities under thousands of tons of snow. Howling hurricanes tear apart coastal communities with wind and rain. And flash floods wipe entire towns off the face of the earth. As the skies clear, people begin to pick up the pieces. But after the storm, insidious damage is still being done. Our most vital natural resource is under assault, our nation's waters.
We're at the Chattahoochee Nature Center, and we're trying to find out what a watershed is. First victim. I need you to tell me what a watershed is. Do you have any idea?
Watershed?
A watershed? Where people go to the bathroom?
Sweating, I guess.
Something to do with sweating?
Uh-huh.
Like after you run, when
You perspire, yeah.
and then you shed it?
Uh-huh.
We wanted to ask you if you knew what a watershed was.
A watershed?
Yeah.
Is it kind of like the rain?
Do you know what a watershed is?
A shed that holds water.
Come here for a second. I want to ask you something. Do you know what a watershed is?
No. No.
Do you have any idea? What do you think it has something to do with?
I don't know.
What a watershed is?
Yeah.
That's just a drain pool, I guess you'd say, or the drain area. That's where the rainwater drains into the river.
Correct. That's a great answer.
A watershed is that area of land that drains to a body of water, be that if it's a river, a stream, the ocean, an estuary, a bay. Wherever you live drains to some water body, and you live in a watershed. So everyone lives in a watershed.
And in this modern industrial age, our water sources are becoming more contaminated with each passing year.
The biggest water quality problem that we have in the nation today is polluted runoff.
All water east of the Continental Divide drains to the Atlantic, while water west of the divide flows to the Pacific. And one drop of rain can cross many different watersheds along the way. As runoff flows into rivers, streams, and storm drains, the water picks up trash, dirt, bacteria, toxic chemicals, and fertilizers, creating a soup of pollutants that is extremely hazardous to the environment. And the consequences of polluted runoff exist worldwide.
The UN estimate is that there's about 1 billion people on the planet right now who don't have adequate access to fresh water.
97% of all water on Earth is salty ocean water. Of the remaining 3% that's fresh, over 2/3 is frozen in glaciers and polar ice. That leaves less than 1% of all the planet's water for our use.
I predict in the future that some of the U.S. water needs are going to come through pipeline because we have just overused our supply.
To address the complex threats facing U.S. water resources, the Environmental Protection Agency recommends adopting a watershed approach.
We're trying to reconnect some of the river.
It's a method that looks at each watershed for its own unique set of environmental challenges and solutions.
In many cases, people mistakenly identify large discharge pipes in the water as the problem. But that may not be the problem. It may be coming from agricultural runoff. It may be coming from stormwater runoff over parking lots and impervious surfaces. Every watershed is different, and you need to look at each watershed in its own terms and then think systematically about how you remediate, how you clean up that watershed.
In California, the Santa Monica Bay watershed drains a dangerous amount of polluted runoff after each storm.
When it rains, literally the whole residue of urban living ends up getting washed into the storm drain system and ends up going straight into the bay on Santa Monica Bay's beaches with no treatment whatsoever.
It's actually like a giant toilet flushing because all of the pollution, the dog mess has been building up and building up and building up. When it rains, it just flushes into the storm drain and goes directly into the surf.
In 1996, the Santa Monica Bay Restoration Commission proved there was a link between the contaminated runoff in the Santa Monica Bay and reports of illness afflicting people who swim there.
What we did find was at the outlets of storm drains, no matter where they were up and down the bay, if there was a flow of runoff into the surf zone, those people that were swimming in those areas definitely experienced higher incidences of illnesses.
The pollutants in the water affect surfers because we're actually the indicator species with all the pollutants. When we are in the waters, we're ingesting it through our skin and our mouth. Even if people don't take a swallow of water, it's still getting into our systems, our ears, any orifice in your body. And it causes infections, it can cause colds, sore throats at the very least.
I wouldn't want to swim in, water that's got those diseases in there, just floating around, making more diseases.
I've seen it pretty much as bad as be. I've seen crap floating out in the water, literally.
Generically, we call it fecal coliform. More specifically, you might know of it as E. coli, salmonella, or enterococcus. Whatever's in poop.
There's times when it tastes funky, for sure.
Every day, the city and county of Los Angeles perform a battery of tests to keep the public informed about water quality in the Santa Monica Bay. Cesar Arzadan begins the monitoring process each morning by taking a series of coastline water samples. Then it's back to the lab for analysis.
Most of the bacteria that you're going to see, it comes from feces. And when you put it under the UV light, you're going to see a different kind of color. It's a fluorescent sign that there is a bacteria, and that one is called E. coli. That one definitely is feces from animals, or it could be humans also.
The results are reported to the health department, and beach warnings are posted as necessary.
The number of beach postings has decreased, and 85% of the beaches that have been monitored in California have received either A or B grades, and that's significantly different than 4 years ago.
But while progress is being made in California, the harmful effects of polluted runoff are a growing concern everywhere. So what can the average person do to help reduce pollution in our watersheds?
How you apply pesticides or not in your garden, how you wash your cars, making sure that you don't throw cigarette butts out onto the street.
Do not dump things on the ground, especially oils or any chemical pollutants. Pick up after your dogs. A lot of people don't realize how important that is. And just be a conscientious citizen and don't leave anything on the ground.
I think one person can make a difference, and needs to make the difference. If not you, who?
Coming up.
We're heading for what's known as an ecosystem collapse.
Can the Gulf of Mexico be saved from polluted runoff?
Time for an update on today's sea ice edge, and well, you can see for yourself out across the northern Bering. Look at that, a lot of open water over the course of the weekend, some huge changes. Still looking at some small concentrations of ice on the north side of St. Lawrence Island, on the northern edge of the YK Delta and the southern coast of the Norton Sound. And then once you get up north of the Bering, there's still plenty of ice left there, but a lot of it's still moving around. A lot of it will be changing in the coming days. We have a large open area there from just about Point Lay all the way to north of Barrow. So conditions are changing quickly thanks to the warm southerly air blowing in. Here's a look at southeast now, and you'll notice winds remain pretty light across the inner waterways, anywhere from southwest around 15 around Stevens Passage to a northwesterly flow around Clarence Strait up to 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. Predominant wind across the outer coast is about 25 knots from west to northwest. Seas running around 8 feet in all areas, down to 6 to 8 feet as we head into Thursday. Wind still coming in a similar direction, more of a northerly flow through the inner waterways though. Around Lynn Canal, it's around 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. Higher gusts around Stevens Passage. Plan for that on Thursday. And look for south and southwesterly winds coming up Cook Inlet as we get into Wednesday. 15 to 20 knots or so, a little bit stronger in Shelikof Strait. East around Kodiak, looking at 20 knots with a 5-foot sea. Picking up a little bit as you head into the north and western Gulf. 20 to 25 knots with a 5 to 7-foot sea. There inside Prince William Sound, only 10 knots with 2-foot seas. Looks like a great day tomorrow and a similar day on Thursday. Westerly winds across the northern Gulf, including outside of Resurrection Bay. Southwesterlies on either side of the Barrens at 15 to 20 knots. 6-foot seas on the Gulf side. 4-foot seas there across the areas from Homer to about Calgon Island, and the winds slow down a little bit heading into the northern Cook Inlet, around 10 knots with a 3-foot sea. Southwesterlies inside of Shelikof on Thursday, 15 knots with a 6-foot sea. For the Alaska Peninsula, southeasterly wind inside of Bristol Bay, 25 knots with a 5-foot sea. Southerlies around False Pass, Cold Bay, and King Cove. From Chignik all the way out toward Castle Cape, 20 knots there with a southerly wind with an 8-foot sea. Thursday, similar conditions there, but look for a lighter southeasterly flow inside of Bristol Bay. Winds from 25 to 30 knots on the southern end of Alaska Peninsula with 7 to 8-foot seas lower on the Bering Sea side. Now for the Aleutians, across the central and eastern chain, winds around 15 to 20 knots there for Wednesday's 7-foot seas, and the Bering Sea coast 8 to 9-foot seas for the Pacific side, and slightly stronger winds from the south and southwest on Wednesday. But watch what happens as we get into Thursday. Winds pick up and change direction. Out across the west, northwesterlies are blowing into low pressure, working into the southern Bering Sea once again. 40-knot winds out ahead of it, looking from Adak to Atka to Kiska. 13 to 20-foot seas they're developing, 16-foot seas coming up on the Pacific coast, and winds across the central and eastern chain will blow around 30 to 35 knots there as we head into Nikolsky and Unalaska. 9 to 12-foot seas on the Bering side, 11 to 12-foot seas on the Pacific side for Thursday. So watch for some changes on Thursday afternoon. Southeasterly still coming across the Capes and the west coast as we head through Wednesday, 20 to 25 knots, 6-foot seas there. 9-foot seas around St. Matthew and 8-foot seas for the Pribilofs on a 20-knot wind from the south. By Thursday, winds pick up a little bit more north of Nunivak Island. Try saying that 5 times fast. Easterlies around St. Matthew, 35 knots with a 12-foot sea, and southeasterlies around the Pribilofs with an 11-foot sea there on Thursday. The predominant flow still from the east and southeast heading through Thursday. Now for the north coast, Barrow's looking at more of a light northerly flow for Wednesday, and we still have enough ice to show you ice there on the map. 15 to 25 knots with an east wind there for the Beaufort Seacoast, but on the Chukchi Seacoast, we have enough open water to forecast the seas now. We're looking at 3 to 5-foot seas there for the Chukchi Sea. 15-knot winds there around the Kotzebue Sound, and easterlies blowing offshore 25 to 30 knots there from Wainwright all the way down toward Point Hope. For Wednesday, the winds switch direction. We get more of an onshore flow coming into Cape Lisburne and Kivalina. 10-knot winds there with a 2-foot sea. Otherwise, easterlies from Barrow to Wainwright, 4-foot seas there west of Wainwright. And we're still talking about north and easterly winds on 15 knots around the Beaufort Seacoast for your Thursday at this point. So again, watch for some changes north of the Bering as we head into the end of the week with continued southerly winds taking shape. High pressure across the north slope will lock in some areas of fog tonight. Otherwise, it's low pressure across the central Yukon and across the western Bering that are steering a lot of our weather, including the big high pressure system across the Gulf. That's keeping things quiet and fairly dry for southeast. As a front moves into south and western Alaska, watch for some winds and rain to come through. Winds will continue to be mainly out of the south and southeast as we head into Wednesday. High pressure tries to slow that down. Watch for an increasing threat for thunderstorms across the interior as we head into Thursday with high pressure still in charge of the Gulf. That's your Alaska weather. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.